Good morning, everybody. So excited to have you here this morning. I'm Yesenia, and I will be your tech point person today. As a quick orientation to our virtual space, we'd like to highlight a few features to engage your participation. I noticed somebody asked about audio, so I'll go ahead and highlight that first. If you look at the bottom of the screen, there's the phone number to call and the webinar ID. If you just want, separate audio on your phone, or if you're having trouble hearing the panelists at any point throughout the webinar, then you will see there's a Q&A button that you can press. That is for you to submit questions to the panelists. If you see a question that somebody else has already asked and it's something you're curious about too, you can go ahead and like that, upvote it, let us know it's a popular question. For the chat, you can use that if you need to troubleshoot any tech issues with me. You can go ahead and send me a private chat and I'll work on that with you. It's also for you, as y'all have been doing, to interact with each other. Let us know who's here. Let us know what you're excited about. Drop us a comment. Finally, you will note that this Zoom webinar is being recorded, and we'll be adding closed captioning to the recording to be able to send out to folks and improve accessibility on this content. And I'm excited to hand this over to Shantae.
Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Black Feminist Institution Building, Employee Policies in the Age of COVID, and Uprising in Defense of Black Lives. My name is Shantae Parker, and I am the Managing Director at the Neighborhood Defender Service of Detroit, a holistic public defender office. I'm also a Southern Black woman who last year moved to Detroit, one of the Blackest cities in this country, to help build from scratch and lead a new public defender office. We're really happy that you're here with us today. The response to this webinar has been unlike anything we imagined when we decided to have it as a way to share our employee policies. In this moment of unprecedented barriers, fear, grief, isolation, disruption of our basic way of life, what does it take to hold people in the work? What is our responsibility as employers to support the well-being of our staff in this moment? And can a Black feminist politic be at the center of an organization that is led by white people? These are some of the questions we'll be working through in this webinar. And I'm really excited that this webinar is presented by the Essie Justice Group, an organization that is very, very close to my heart. Essie Justice Group is the nation's leading advocacy organization of women with incarcerated loved ones. We are California-based nonprofit, founded 6 years ago with the mission to harness the collective power of women with incarcerated loved ones to end mass incarceration's harm to women. We are Black-led, Black-centered, multicultural organizers, and our members are mothers, daughters, grandmothers, siblings, and partners of people who are behind bars. Today, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 2 Black women has a family member in prison. At Essie, we understand that the work of ending the cycles and systems that harm us, our families, and our communities is transformative and revolutionary work. And you're going to learn about how we hold people in that work, particularly during this time of COVID-19 and the uprising for Black lives. Now, over 500 people registered, and I see that we have 256 people and counting on this webinar. You're working in nonprofit spaces, college classrooms, public advocacy groups, and housing collectives. Within this webinar, we have founders, facilitators, consultants, executive directors, coaches, and board members. You're excited about this conversation and also disappointed by white leadership and anti-Blackness. You're frustrated with organizational ignorance, workplace violence, and a lack of accountability, but you desire culture change. And you want to know how to deal with Karen, don't we all? What all this tells me, though, is that there is a need, and I feel really, really hopeful that you'll get something, even one thing, out of this webinar that meets the need you have today. I also want to set some expectations because while some of you are looking for guidance, on how we can more fully live our organizational values around Black liberation through our organizational policies, and how to ensure our workplace is the best possible workplace for Black people, especially Black women. This webinar is not a magic potion, although there is a lot of Black girl magic happening right now. What I do know and believe is that this is the beginning of many more conversations. Now let's get started, Essie style. At Essie, we open up our spaces by saying our names and checking in with a question or two. Lily and Gina are going to check in, and I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves first and share your gender pronouns. And we have two check-in questions today. One, share with us your Black feminist leader, a Black feminist leader or thinker who has inspired you that you want to bring into this space right now. And two, why is building a Black feminist space important to your work? And as we're doing that, I would love for the folks on the webinar to feel free to drop your check-ins in the chat. And again, I'm going to share those for you. What's the one Black feminist leader who inspires you? And why is building a Black feminist space important to your work? And of course, I'm going to model for you. I'm Shantae. Hey, y'all. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Someone that I want to bring into this space is Pauli Murray. She's a Black woman, obviously, not so obviously, but obviously, an attorney, an activist, a priest at one point in her life. And she actually designed the legal strategy behind Brown versus Board of Education. Just so you know, if you didn't know, read about it. She's brilliant. And I'm wearing this polka dotted dress today for her because I read in one of her book about her life. She said that one of her first interviews, she wore a black polka dot dress, and I love polka dots. So I just had to do that, especially for Pauli. She taught me how to grapple with the realities I've encountered as a public defender. Now, I worked as a Black woman now in New Orleans, in Harlem, in Detroit, and in Brooklyn as a public defender. And public defenders are on the front lines of our criminal legal system. You think about first responders, that's who we are right there in the trauma, right at the beginning and throughout. And it's hard work. And as a Black woman with incarcerated loved ones, that's even more difficult. It's been even more difficult for me. And I know that the only way that I have survived and thrived was because of Black women. Wherever I go, I find them and I make them my circle, right? And so that's the way that we work together, the way that we held each other through mountains and valleys. That's how I made it through. And I want Black women who work with me to be able to exist and thrive in the institutions that I work in on behalf of Black people. That's my Black feminist politic. And that's why a Black feminist Black feminist institution building is so relevant right now, right? Because we got a lot of mountains to climb. And we also have a lot of valleys that we got to navigate our way through. So that inspires me and keeps me going. I'm really excited for this conversation. And I know that I'm going to get some of my needs met during this time. I'm now going to turn it over to Lily, who is just glowing today. She's our Senior Director of Strategy and Operations. Lily has been down since day one. I know I say a lot to people. I've been down with Essie since day one, before day one with Gina, but Lily has also been right there. She, to me, two words I think about with Lily is dedicated and thoughtful, and she's a master. When I tell you master strategist and builder, what you see at Essie is a reflection of Lily's work. So I'm gonna turn it over to Essie. I'm Essie, we all Essie. I'm gonna turn it over to Lily.
Thank you so much, Shantae. Yeah, and it's been just such an honor to be in this work of building Essie with you and Gina and so many. As Shantae said, my name is Lily Mandlin and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Senior Director of Strategy and Operations here at Essie Justice Group, and I've been part of Essie for 5 out of our last 6 years of existence. And what my work really looks like here is the work of this webinar, is of building organizations of Essie as movement infrastructure, right? As a container that can hold and support the brilliance of our team of organizers. A Black feminist thinker who I draw inspiration from in this work is, is the Titan of bell hooks. And She is someone whose writings helped politicize me early on, and who really helped me think differently. And I think one thing that, I want to bring into this space is that I think so often of is the Black feminist definition of love, which is complex, which is rigorous, which is much more than a feeling, which is more than care. It requires knowledge, it requires respect, and it really requires action. Love is an action. And I think about this concept of radical revolutionary love that has been really critical to helping me find and build my political home here at Essie. And I've experienced and borne witness to what that looks like, watching, a loved one and close friend step across the painted white line outside of San Quentin prison and into the arms of his partner and loved one after 16 years inside. Like, that's what radical love looks like. And radical love for me also looks like what it is to build an organization and an institution that is actively loving to its people, right? So how do we think about that? And what I want to say also is that as a white woman who's dedicated to the project of Black feminist institution building, it's really important for me to think about and sit within and hold that I am, moving from an understanding that I benefit from the white supremacist structures in our country that were designed very much to support people who look like me, and specifically at the expense of people who look like my colleagues, my co-presenters, our membership, right? And so institution building in that vein, when you understand that, it is not neutral. It is absolutely, when done by white people, often generally white supremacist. That's something that we need to hold and that we need to move from. It's the values of systems and laws that we were raised with that have benefited us and that have positioned white people to build institutions, right? That's white supremacy. And it has often, in fact, been the purpose of institution building when led by white people. So then, what does that mean for us, right? And what does that mean that I think about that? I think where I come from and what I have done in doing my own work on whiteness, which I very much continue to do on a daily basis, is that, that is my history, that is my current context. And there is also context and history of movement for mothers who have been in active solidarity with Black women who have been leading liberation work, like the freedom fighters who helped Assata Shakur escape from prison, who acted as race traders during the civil rights movement alongside Ella Baker, and that by accepting an invitation to be a part of Black feminist institution building offered by Black feminist leadership like Shantae, like Gina, that is a way that I can meaningfully contribute to this movement, a movement that is focused very clearly on the liberation of Black people, and that will build a better world for all of us. So I just really want to thank you all and pass this over now to Gina.
Thank you so much, Lily. Thank you, Shantae. Hey, everybody. I am so excited to be here with 295 people. I'm just like, my heart is just exploding with joy seeing all of the familiar names in the chat box. It's making me miss y'all so much and wish that we could be together in person having this conversation. But thank you for showing up for this and showing up for your team and for the work. My name is Gina Clayton Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. I am the founder and executive director of Essie Justice Group, our loving and powerful community of women with incarcerated loved ones. I also hold a position as a leader of the policy table for the Movement for Black Lives, and am a part of various other coalitions. And I think the way that I want to answer your question, Shantae, because it is a hard one, just one Black feminist to inspire me. I'm going to go back to my great-grandmother, Essie Bailey. She might not have ever called herself, I don't think she did. I knew her very well, had the privilege of growing up with my great-grandmother. I don't think she ever called herself a Black feminist. But my understanding and my politicization as a Black feminist and being politicized in that politic comes from her. And she was born on a sharecropping farm in Louisiana. She moved to California, worked 3 jobs, had 3 kids, and she really built the foundation upon which I stand and many generations in my family stand and are able to find our identity, our access, and owe a great debt to. I learned from her that we should not and do not need to go it alone. Essie Bailey, my great grandmother, for whom Essie Justice Group is named, and her daughter, my grandmother, taught me that sisterhood is survival. She taught me that sisterhood is joy. She taught me that sisterhood is how we overcome adversity, that sisterhood is powerful. And I lived with her I kind of benefiting from these wisdoms. She passed away a month after I started my work as a tenants' rights attorney in a public defense office in Harlem, where I met Shantae. And when I founded Essie in 2014, our Sisterhood of Social Justice, I knew that I wanted a political home for Black women, where Black women could hone their purpose in the direction of liberatory, abolitionist, feminist organizing. Give me one moment, because I just want to make sure that my Zoom is still working, because it went away. Oh, there it is. Okay. Sorry, y'all. Just move this here. And so for me, the project of Black feminist institution building was one in which it was one that was very personal to me. At Essie, we believe that it's not just what we do, but how we do it that is important, that is critical. And having worked in Black organizing, in public interest law, in movement settings for nearly 20 years now, I have firsthand felt and experienced the passion, the spirit, and the impact erosion that you so often feel inside of a workplace as a Black woman. And so creating a workplace for people, not just Black people, but people with historically and currently oppressed identities, a multicultural space where people who hold these identities can not just be kind of included or kind of subjected to tolerance policies, but can really find their purpose and thrive, was at the heart of what our project was up to with Essie from the outset. So that's why this conversation is important to me. That's why this project of Black feminist institution building is important to me. And that's why I'm just absolutely bursting with excitement to see now 305 people on this webinar. So what I want to do is I want to go into, dive right into the next pieces of our content here. Before, we are here to discuss Black feminist institution building, but it is not appropriate to assume that we all carry the same definition or have the same level of familiarities with Black feminism as a politic. For the purposes of this webinar and our work at Essie, when we say Black feminist, we actually aren't talking about a Black person who is feminist, right? This might be obvious to some of y'all, but I want to make that clear. We mean it as a politic. In the same way that feminists can be people of all genders because it is an ideology, a worldview, a politics, so is Black feminism. We think of the politic of Black feminism as having at the center certain themes. And I want to run through a few of those themes. And please know that as soon as I indicate to Yesenia to go to the next slide, that what you'll see is not a comprehensive list. This is not a college course in Black feminist politic or theory. It is what we use internally at Essie, and it is important for us just to be transparent with y'all about how we think about it, so that you understand how to kind of what we've been distilling our policies and the process of getting to our policies through. So with that, if we can go to the next slide, I'll touch on just a few themes that we feel are critical in understanding our Black feminist politic. So the first theme here is intersectionality. And intersectionality, of course, shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw, is a term that was coined in the last few decades, but definitely has a much longer tradition in terms of a concept that was developed by Black feminists over a long period of theory development. Different ways we've talked about this as interlocking oppression, double jeopardy. Shout out to the Combahee River Collective, Francis Veal and others who help to explain and pave the way for a broader understanding of the concept that multiple oppressions, that Black women are at the center of multiple oppressions, and in particular, Black, queer, trans communities, femmes, people are at the center of, that this creates a compounded reality of harm. And at Essie, in terms of intersectionality, we talk about intersectionality, and people talk about intersectionality a lot, but the way that we discuss it here for the purposes of this conversation is that we think of it as wisdom, right? That there is wisdom that exists in places of intersection and pressure. And that people experiencing compounded pressures of classism, of sexism, of homophobia, of transphobia, of racism, that those people have unique value and are more potent, are positioned to be more potent contributors to radical social change as advocates and leaders. And so because we believe that this is true, this means that we must create workspaces that center and that invite those people and retain those people intentionally. The second value is love without disposability. This is kind of what Lily talked about in terms of, Bell Hooks's beautiful teachings about love and others, right? And I think what this is important, I want to take a moment to explain, the idea of love without disposability is really important to women with incarcerated loved ones who are our base. And those of us who have loved ones inside, I think, know the way in which our family members and by extension, we have been rendered disposable, but that we are extended love, benefits, the good things only if on certain conditions, and that kind of love is one that we reject. Love without disposability is also acknowledging that Black feminism, while an autonomous set of theories, or a autonomous theory, is also one that is in reaction to the harm of white second wave feminism. And that there is a critique, and an important and I think a justified critique, that white feminism has often come with a strong through line of disposability or conditional love. That is one that we reject. And so Black feminism is critical for us because we believe in love without disposability. The third theme that I want to highlight is that our bodies, our relationships, and our intimacies belong to us. One of the pieces of Black feminist politic that is incredibly, incredibly central is the rejection of coerced heterosexuality and heteronormativity. It is Audre Lorde that teaches us that it is not our differences that divide us. It is in our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences in which we are divided. And so at Essie, creating intentional space for queer and gender nonconforming people is critical and is part of our Black feminist politic. Next, connection as resistance to political isolation. So I would like to maybe somebody drop in becauseshe'spowerful.org. In a couple of years ago, we published a report, our membership and several other organizations, likely some of y'all on this in this webinar, helped to create the Because She's Powerful report and study. In that report, we furthered and actually introduced an idea, an assessment of material conditions that says that right now, due to mass incarceration, there is a huge amount, a very large amount of social isolation taking place amongst women, particularly Black and brown women, as a result of incarceration. And political isolation is a definition that we have applied to a set of circumstances where there is a the level of isolation has reached a degree and impacted a historically oppressed and marginalized group to such an extent that it is by its nature political, that it is undermining the political power of that group, that it is undermining the health outcomes for that group, that it is disrupting the power and the agency of that group. And so our assessment is that there is massive political isolation that is one of the effects of incarceration happening to women, particularly Black women. It is important to understand that that is our analysis at Essie of the current conditions, and that therefore the Black feminist value of connection, of relationship, is critical and key. So what does that mean for our workplaces in terms of creating access to people's abilities to connect with one another, connect more deeply with themselves, their histories, and their passion and their purpose? That is what we're talking about when we talk about connection as a key concept or theme of radical Black feminist politic. The next slide has a few more themes I'd like to go through. Vulnerability as an asset actually connects perfectly to what I was just talking about in terms of connection, because we want Essie to be a place where people can mess up. We really do. We want it to be a place where people find their excellence, and they know that there are standards, and they perform, and they feel good about achieving things. But we also want it to be a place where authenticity is what is expected, because we know, as I pointed out before, that authenticity is a source of connection. So being authentic means to be imperfect. And so to be imperfect needs to be allowed and needs to be valued and appreciated. And so that is also very critical when we talk about creating a Black feminist workspace, that this is a value that we really lean into and is core to the Black feminist politic. Vulnerability is an asset. Next, a non-extractive approach to value. So this is, a lot of times our relationships as bosses, managers, HR professionals can seem so transactional, right? We think about, outcomes, we think about performance, we think about all of these different kinds of things that really, it can feel just very harsh, very transactional. And at the same time, we of course care about having impact and measuring that and all of that too. So this can be tricky. So at Essie, our Black feminist politic tells us that we are to have a non-extractive approach to value. And I think Angela Davis's essay, Reflections on the Black Woman's Role in the Community of Slaves, really helps us understand what we mean by this value. So as distinct from second wave feminist conceptions of motherhood, for example, as inherently oppressive because it relegates women to a role of kind of stay-at-home mother, right? This is like very much a centerpiece of second wave feminist thinking. This was a piece of that politic that just did not resonate with Black women, right? Black women who, because of economic circumstance, were oftentimes not even given an option to, quote, stay at home. I think about my great-grandmothers, like, stay at home mom. What? I have three jobs. I got mouths to feed. I got, stay at home motherhood. That is not my fight. And so for us, like, being able to say a non-extractive approach to value means actually inviting in the multitude of identities that particular ones of our team, of ourselves, hold, and saying that that is valuable, that we're not here to extract this one part of you that is the, quote, worker and leave behind the, quote, mother, right? That is what we mean in terms of the kind of the rejection of the disintegrated extractive approach as a value. The next piece is that there is wisdom in our unique relationships to power. And I think actually what I wanted that to say is that there is wisdom in our historic relationships to power, to make it a little bit more precise. And so what I mean by that is that the way that, Pat Robinson, Patricia Hayden, Donna Middleton, there's this quote that says, "We must learn why we have loved our chains and not wanted to throw them off." I'm gonna say that again. We must learn why we have loved our chains and not wanted to throw them off. This, I think, quote, spells out really beautifully the complexity of our situation and our circumstance as people who have been inside of long and layered traditions of oppressive structures, harming us, degrading us, and taking away our loved ones. And it says to us as employers that we need to know that when people come into our hierarchy and our structure and our power as bosses or managers, that there's a whole lot of realities that people are walking inside of that into that space with. And then we must acknowledge that, and that we must be caretakers of that and find the way that that can help our work. As we said earlier, intersectionality, there's wisdom and power in those intersection moments, in the places of pressure. We have to hone that, but also allow for some space for healing in the spaces in which we hold, and really write that into the DNA of our work and our culture. Finally, and this one I love, that we have at center the belief that love must be daring and fearless, that we must be daring and fearless in our love, and that is our revolutionary commitment. This is critical. And when we talk about policies, I'm gonna turn it over to Lily in just a moment, but when we talk about our policies, this idea of fearless love means that we might need to push the envelope a little when a government tells us that we need to do something that does not align with our politic. We might need to push when people tell us you aren't allowed to employ an undocumented worker. We might need to push when someone tells us that it is too much to give people leave and time to be the caretakers they need to be for their society, community, and for their families, and work and achieve the outcomes at the workplace. We need to push. That is what this is saying, is that as workplaces that we can do that, there's not a cop-out of saying, well, the law says, right? Nah, this is me, a lawyer, saying, nah, that's not a thing. We are here to be revolutionary agents of social change and make what is right real. So with that, I want to go to the next slide and ask that we talk a little bit about a piece that feels a little bit separate, but it was also very core to the development of our policies. And just so you all know, we're going to be sending out our policies to each one of you who's registered for the webinar after this webinar. So you'll have our full employee handbook at your disposal. But one of the things to know is that we write our policies for our people. And so when you read through the pages of our employee manual, you need to know who our people are, because our people might not be your people. There are nuances, right? And so at Essie, our people are Black and brown people, women, femmes, transgender, gender nonconforming people, queer people, people who have loved ones behind bars, formerly incarcerated people, caregivers, right? These are our people. And I just want to touch on one area that I said earlier about vulnerability, and like try to get comfortable with leaning into the vulnerability a bit here. So our policy process, it wasn't perfect. In fact, there were moments where we really struggled as a team together. And this wasn't just, a process where one HR professional wrote some policy, listened to us, say what we want, wrote some policies, and then shipped them over, and then the board voted on them. And that was not our process. In fact, we did this as a team. And I'll never forget when we were at a staff retreat several years ago now. And we introduced, Lily, you were right there, you remember, we passed around our cute little document and we're like, here's some proposed policies. And we thought, look, Essie is a place where we have said for a while, we want to be a place where women can get paid what they deserve to do this work, right? Women can get paid in a way where they don't have to have 3-4 side hustles and this other thing just to pay for all the generations and the neighbor next door and, somebody's baby who came up on your, stoop all of a sudden and you need to take care of them too. We want to make sure that at Essie, you're able to focus on the work that is in front of you and be here with us 100% of the time, and not have to also go and do another thing, right, to earn the living. So I'm saying that because what happened was we had passed out these policies, and one of the policies said, was a policy discouraging moonlighting, right? In that vein, discouraging moonlighting. Moonlighting is the idea of where, you know, you can take on other work, maybe like at night, right? That's why it's called moonlighting, like take on other paid work while also holding your job at Essie. Now at Essie, we don't say that's not allowed. We say we discourage it, strongly discourage it. When I handed out that policy, one of our staff members broke into tears. We had to stop the meeting, y'all, have a break, have like whole healing process. And what the aha moment for me was that, you know, you panned out a policy that says no moonlighting to Black women whose histories, whose identities, and whose sources of stability for so long under a very real set of circumstances that has said you are not allowed to ever make what you need to make in order to take care of yourself and your loved ones, has looked like feeling our stability and our sense of control and organization and our life is going to be all right. We got what we need in making sure we got all the jobs lined up at once, right? Like that is a reality. And so for this particular employee, it was in a visceral way terrifying to read that she was going to have to depart from that type of lifestyle and work at Essie. And so I'm telling you this because I want us to know before we end this conversation, and I think we all do, just how personal, how real, how deeply felt the policies that we share with our team, even in draft form, are, and how carefully we have to hold those conversations. And so that was an aha moment for us. I want to go to the next slide because where we landed after a year, you know, few years long process, many conversations and healing and revisions and teamwork, was this year we sent out our handbook to one of our newest members of the team. And this was what she said. This made me cry. This is the difference between you're welcome here and this was made with me in mind. So our process started with tears and it ended with tears, y'all. And it's still going, and there will probably still be some tears. But that's okay because we're just, you know, we are vulnerable, imperfect people trying to make real our radical Black feminist politic. So with that, going to the next slide, what we're going to do here today is take you through 4 policies. If you could go to the next slide, great. So we're going to take you through 4 policies. We're going to do a deep dive of 4 policies in our manual. We're not going to go through our whole thing as an effort to kind of show you what some of the tensions were, but show you more than anything our process, because it's important to know that this is not a cut and paste exercise. Merely sending out our policies and saying, here y'all, like copy paste into that doesn't work. Why? Because you build policies for your people are not my people are not necessarily your people. And so we want to tell you the how-to in terms of like what we did, but also do that humbly, knowing that you all have been in your own processes most likely and hopefully, and that there's probably things that we can learn from you. So we're going to go into a policy deep dive. We're going to talk a little bit about how Essie responded to the current moment of Black uprising and COVID, internally, given the fact that we had a whole new set of realities that these policies were not written in relationship to. Finally, we'll go into some tips and takeaways, and then time permitting, we'll do some questions and answers. So that's our roadmap for the rest of this conversation. So now I'm gonna take a breath. Everyone take a breath with me. Great. Y'all still here? Look at all these. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. So let's go into our first policy. Reentry leave. So as we've explained, Essie Justice Group is an organization of women with incarcerated loved ones. What that means is that we knew and understand very deeply what it is that women and gender nonconforming people who have loved ones behind bars, as well as formerly incarcerated women, have to deal with in terms of navigating all of the systems and the oppressive structures that persist and exist upon and in our lives, while at the same time accomplishing our passions and our purposes in this lifetime via movement work, right? And so if you go to the next slide, one of the things that I just want to give some context, not everybody here is in the criminal justice space or in the criminal legal system reform space or race justice work. So just to make really clear that right now we have multiple crises happening that are impacting Black community and Black people that come from our white supremacist state and history. One of them is the caging of our people. With millions and millions of people behind bars in this country, we find that it is women who are the reentry system, right? The 24/7 caretakers of loved ones who come home, and not just caretakers, but partners, right? Because our loved ones are taking care of themselves as well. But partners in the navigating of that complex reentry process is something that women are doing on the regular. In fact, if you go to the next slide, I just want to kind of underscore the point. 1 in 2 Black women in this country has a family member in prison. Shantae started with this. It's incredibly important to know, okay, you want to create a Black feminist workspace, then equip yourself with the understanding of what it is, what the realities are that Black women are living within in terms of the multitude of crises in our current society. And so what I want to say about this is actually just very quickly to explain 2 things. One, when someone comes home from jail or prison, they are most often going home to a woman. What that then looks like is everything from driving that person to parole visits and probation check-ins, to setting up and hooking up cell phones, to making sure that they got their clothes that fit, to making sure that there's a bed or a couch to sleep on, to making sure that the connections between family members happen in ways that are as smooth as possible, to caretake over any healing that has to happen, to be the ones also to navigate benefits as well as healthcare, mental health care, and so much more. That is what women are doing, right, in the reentry period. And I want to explain that because when I turn it over to Lily in just a moment to tell you what our reentry leave policy is, I don't want there to be any confusion that this is work that women are performing. It is unpaid labor. It is not vacation. It is not time off. It is work, and that is something that is critical to understand in order to really be able to situate this and to approach, if you all end up doing a reentry leave policy in the right way, to not act as though this is a vacation time. So now what I want to do is turn this over to Lily. I'm going to stop talking and give kind of the proverbial mic to Lily Mandlin, who has really been a incredibly brilliant, compassionate, politically on point accomplice in this work. She is, I think, the mastermind behind so much of the policy work that we do internally at Essie. I want to, I really want to uplift that this is a partnership, and that Lily has been tirelessly, like losing nights of sleep, dedicated to how to get this right and how to do this. And so please, see her as a resource as well. And I now turn it over to you, Lily, to take us through not just the reentry leave policy, but then if you can continue and take us through the parental leave policy and the childcare policy, and then end us with wage withholding orders and garnishments. And Shantae and I will interject where we feel like there's time to do that.
Great, thank you so much, Gina. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And just to say again, it's been such an honor and privilege to be in this work and writing these policies alongside you and our team. Yesenia, if you could go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more about the weeds of our reentry leave policy. So at Essie, we are fighting to bring all of our loved ones home for good. We are a Black feminist abolitionist advocacy organization. That is what we're here to do. And so what that looks like for us on the policy side is that in order for us to enable staff who have loved ones who return home from incarceration, both to celebrate and to enjoy time with their loved one, but as Gina really uplifted, to manage the significant increase in care responsibilities of supporting a loved one and a family during reentry, Essie has a reentry leave policy. And one thing that's important to note is that as of the writing of this policy at the end of last year, we knew of no other models for reentry leave policies that existed. And so we very much encourage our staff members who go on reentry leave and have loved ones who come home to share feedback and ideas for how to improve this policy, because we know that we will want to do that for the future of it. But what our reentry leave policy says, and there's an excerpt up here, and again, you're going to get the whole policy of this one and all of our others as part of our manual, is that if a staff member has a designated loved one who has been incarcerated for a year or more and is being released from incarceration, then the staff member is eligible for reentry leave. And reentry leave is 2 weeks off, fully paid. And then if a person who takes reentry leave goes on reentry leave, then they also are eligible for 10 additional personal days in the year following when their loved one comes home. And so reentry leave can be taken to support the reentry of what we call at Essie a designated loved one. We are defining this broader than outside of a sort of nuclear family definition, right? Because that's not what love relationships always look like. They look broader than that. So we define designated loved ones as someone who and this is earlier in the manual and consistent throughout, as someone who the staff member has a care relationship for or shares care responsibilities with. So that might be a co-parent. Finally, the policy includes a request that if a staff member is planning to take reentry leave, that they of course share that with their supervisor if they know that in advance, but also unlike some of our other policies, we don't require advance notice for taking reentry leave. And that's because dates are set at the whims of a prison system that doesn't give you notice all the time. And so we don't want that to be a difficulty for anybody trying to take reentry leave. So what does that really look like, right? So what that looks like is that if you work at Essie, and if in your case, your designated loved one is your partner, and your partner is coming home from prison, then you can take off 2 weeks to be fully off from work, put your out of office on, right? That's what you're doing. And to really be present at home and be present with your partner and supporting them after release, and also going to probation reports, doctor's appointments, DMVs, job interviews, right? This is labor. And then maybe, following that, like those appointments don't end after 2 weeks. And so, throughout the following year, you have 10 days as thing comes up to take additional time off for those appointments, and to take a day off if you, after doing all this care labor, need a day off for yourself to recharge. And because we created this policy from scratch, and it's a very new policy, we had a lot of questions and decisions to answer. What's the appropriate amount of time for reentry leave? Reentry doesn't end after 2 weeks, right? And is the combination of leave and personal days effective? I think one of the things that we just want to acknowledge is that 2 weeks is not enough time to fully support the reentry of someone who is coming home. So for the many of you who are probably, hopefully thinking about how can I bring reentry leave to my organization, consider whether that's the right amount. It might be a different amount. It might be something else. This is where we started. And as we grow and see this implemented over time, we will make revisions and adjustments. And to come back to the point about what I hope everyone on this call is thinking, the why for this policy feels very obvious for us at Essie. As an organization of women with incarcerated loved ones, our team knows intimately how important it is that this time is taken and that it be compensated, right? And as Gina uplifted and Ashante said, and we'll say it again, it bears repeating to make this visible, 1 in 2 Black women in the United States has a family member in prison. And so while this is definitely Essie's issue, this is also your issue. And so our call to action here is that more organizations should offer reentry leave. And we encourage every organization on this call to start the process of instituting reentry leave at your organization. This policy is relatively new. As I said, we developed it as a team last year, and we're really joyful and feeling so proud to have it in this moment as one of our staff members will be the first to take reentry leave this year when her husband comes home to her and their 4 children after 5 years of incarceration. Wonderful. So I'm going to move on just to keep us going to make sure we have time for all of our policies to our next policy, which is childcare. So at Essie, as Gina shared, and really this should be true of all organizations, you design your policies for your people. And at Essie, our people are community organizers who are also parents, who are also caregivers, who are organizing our members in the evenings and on the weekends. And in the age of mass incarceration, this is, when we're talking about Black women who are caregivers, who are organizers, this is also happening without enough support, right? And so at Essie, what we're trying to do is be an organization where people who are parenting and people who are parenting on their own are able to be professionally successful and really lead the work. And so as this slide shares, we offer 3 kinds of childcare support for different kinds of work-related activities: after-hour meetings, weekend events, and work-related travel. Childcare for after-hour events. Let me talk a little bit about that. So at Essie, we have lots of after-hours events because we organize our members in the evening when they're most available. And at our member meetings, we have childcare. So this is actually kind of simple, right? If you are a staff member who is facilitating and leading a member meeting, then you can bring your children to childcare. But what we found, and that was sort of an interesting issue that we had to deal with, is that there's a gap of time, right? Member meetings start at 6:30, and school lets out as early as 2:30, as late as 4, right? So there's some time in between there that needs to be dealt with. And so what our policy says is that if a staff member is leading an evening meeting at our office or in the community, that you can go and pick up your children, and then you can bring them to the meeting. And the childcare provider that we are hiring for our evening meeting for our members can come early, and Essie will pay for that childcare provider to come early, provide care for your children while you are preparing your facilitation talking points, while you're setting up the food, while you're making it available for folks. And then, the members' children come and members come and everybody participates together. So that's what it looks like for after hours events. Childcare for weekend events. So this is really important for us because at Essie, our weekend organizing retreats are some of our most meaningful events and most important events of the year where we get to do deep work. And so for a community organizer, being able to be fully present and lead sessions of political education, of skill development, and really hold space for members really requires focus. And it's often not possible to do that kind of work and supervise your children at the same time. So while it's the preference that having family taking care of children during that time is great, that is always a preference, it's not always available on a full weekend. And so in order to meet the unusual circumstances of having a full weekend of work, we have a couple of different kinds of support. So the first is that you can hire childcare for the weekend for your home. If you have a childcare provider that you work with, you can hire that childcare provider. And if you're able to do that, Essie will reimburse you up to $750 for your full weekend of childcare. And then if that's not possible, right? Because hiring childcare for a full weekend is, if you can't find family, it doesn't necessarily mean you can find somebody to hire. That's work that we do at Essie for our members to try and make sure that people can participate in our retreats. So if we're having childcare at the retreat, by all means, you can bring your children to childcare at the retreat. But then again, what we see is that there's this gap in time because we have programming potentially from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., but our team and our organizers are waking up early to prepare talking points to do that work. And again, it's hard to do double duty while you're trying to do that work. So what we do in those instances is that, if a staff member wants to bring their children with them, they can also bring with them a close friend or a family member to accompany them on the retreat. And then we as Essie will pay for their accommodations and meals during that time so that they can provide care in those intervening hours. So the third situation that we've encountered to try to create some childcare support for when needed is work-related travel. And this is because we want parents with childcare responsibilities to be able to opt in to speaking at conferences and to be able to go to professional development trainings that are overnight and out of state and require overnight stays. And so when a staff member is unable to find care for, again, that longer period of time, those overnights with a family member that we call volunteer care, right? Care that comes for free. Essie will provide a reimbursement of up to $750 for child care travel to external events. So that was a lot of information, and I just want to say, if you didn't get it all, that is okay. We are going to be sharing, again, these policies. But what I want to talk about is that some of the tensions and the questions that we faced, and we, as Gina talked about with our process, we didn't arrive at these policies overnight. We really arrived at them through trial and error and through open discussion with our staff members who are parents and who are organizers. So one of the questions that we faced and discussed together early on and sort of considered and tried on is, why not just allow parents to bring kids to the office, to events, and not provide childcare? There are plenty of adults around, right? Kids are safe, we're in community. And we tried that. And what we heard was from our team was that trying to supervise your children in those environments and in those workspaces and doing that kind of focused leadership work was really difficult and sometimes impossible, depending on the circumstances, because when parents are bringing their kids, it's because they are, they're not participating in these work events, they are leading them, they're holding them. This is core work. So that kind of focus wasn't conducive to double duty, and so we sought to make it possible for there to be real leadership. Another question that we faced with this policy is that not every parent at Essie needs this kind of support, but could nonetheless take advantage, right? That's something that, especially a policy like this, which takes resources, is something that we really needed to hold and consider. So for example, right, you could have a staff member who has a mother-in-law who's ready and waiting to take care of their kids on a weekend and do this for free, that like revels in that activity, right? And because we provide $750 a weekend for care, that staff member decides to still request the support. And so if this is available in an HR setting, you can't really ask people, right? If they need it, if that's really, something that they need. And it's also not appropriate to ask that either, even if you could. And so the way that, we approach this is that it's important to make really clear at Essie in trainings and in conversations with folks that this policy is a form of barrier reduction and not a benefit. Barrier reduction is about making it possible for parents to access their professional leadership in moments when they otherwise would be unable to. It's also possible to have a childcare benefit, and many organizations might, right? That looks like, a stipend or support or an FSA for childcare benefit. But that's not what this policy is, just to be really clear. And so we make that clear in the policy as well by naming that, in fact, the first option before the others I named for weekend care is that you find your own care with family, loved ones, friends on your own. That's it. That's the first option. And so it's a little strange to include something in a policy that Essie isn't providing, that we aren't accommodating. But it's really important for us that we make that clear, that is the preferred option, and that there are other options as well, but they are not necessarily the default if you have other options. And then from there, you have to trust your team. And that's really important. And in fact, we have some guiding principles that we'll talk about later, but trusting your team is one of them. You really have to trust your team. And so part of this and what it takes for us at Essie to do that is to build a culture where we're open about those resource tensions that I'm sure I can see in the chat, right, are coming up for folks, and ask our team to co-hold that. I'm going to pause here and open it up to see if Gina and Shantae and those who have been more in the chat want to sort of speak to anything in this moment before moving on to our next policy.
I don't have really that much to add. I think that you're really beautifully going through it. I'm seeing a lot of questions around how you budget for these types of policies. And so maybe that's something I think that will come up as a question for other policies that we're going to go into, maybe our next policy as well, a parental leave policy. So maybe that's something that we can address after going into parental leave, but maybe we'll do that, go do that next.
Great.
Thank you.
Great, just writing that down. Okay, wonderful. So the next policy I'm going to talk about is parental leave. Yesenia, if you could share the next slide. Wonderful. So parental leave policies are often seen as and considered like a litmus test, right? For like how feminist you are as an organization. And this is true for nonprofits, this is true for corporations, right? How good are you on women's issues has everything to do with what your parental leave policy is. And you know, we see this as limited and we see this as problematic, but we also really believe in parental leave as an important policy. So I want to say both of those things. And we did a lot of research and thinking about what this should look like at Essie. So I'll go ahead and go to the next slide and talk about what our policy is. So at Essie, we provide time off for parental leave for 3 different things: for bonding, for adjustment, and for health and healing. So as the slide says, for bonding time, for staff who become parents, we provide up to 16 weeks of fully paid time off through a combination of Essie wages and state benefits to bond with a child. And then following that bonding time, we have adjustment time. So we also provide 6 weeks of time to adjust back to your full-time work schedule where you work 3 days a week rather than 5, and you do that at full-time compensation. And then the final kind of time that we have is health and healing time. So if a staff member gives birth and needs additional time off as recommended by a medical provider, Essie will provide up to 4 months of additional fully paid leave through a combination of state benefits and Essie wages for as long as they're medically certified to be off. So what this means is that if you go on parental leave at Essie without having pregnancy complications where you access health and healing time, that looks like 4 months, right? 16 weeks, 4 months of fully time off, and then a transition time of 6 weeks. So a total of being on leave, partially or fully, for 5.5 months. And then if you also have pregnancy complications, that means that you need additional time. That is actually 8 months of full time off that you could be accessing, plus an additional 6 weeks, so 9.5 months. So that's how much time that we really have. So another piece that's important, right, is eligibility. So staff who worked at Essie for a year are eligible for parental leave. All staff who become parents are eligible for parental leave, whether that's through surrogacy, whether that's through adoption, through giving birth, and whether or not the staff member was the person who gave birth. So a couple of things to talk about in terms of our approach that I just want to name. One, we wanted to make a policy that doesn't prioritize heteronormative family structures. So that's why we provide the same time off for lots of different ways of becoming parents, right, for bonding. So that's the same time off for bonding and adjustment if you become a parent because you give birth, or if you and your partner have a surrogate, that's the same amount of time. The second is that we have a crisis in Black maternal health in this country, and we employ Black women caretakers at Essie. That is a reality that lives in this policy, right? So what does that mean for us? It means that our policy leans in the direction of taking care of people with health complications related to pregnancy. That's that health and healing time. So if you work at Essie and you become pregnant and you need to take time off for medical reasons before or after pregnancy, you're fully compensated for that up to 8 months of time to bond and to heal. And then you can transition back to work with adjustment time. The third thing that I want to talk a little bit about is about that we didn't want to create sort of a Sophie's choice of taking off time with respect to parental leave, right? Like we didn't want to have parents deciding if they needed to take off time to be sick or take off time for parental leave, because being a parent in your first year of, of the first year of a child's life, you probably need a vacation later on, right? You might need to be visiting family to introduce the baby to your in-laws, to other families. And it also, getting pregnant doesn't mean that you're not going to have the flu in February if you give birth in November. That has nothing to do with it. And so we really wanted to make sure that we could do that. So what that looks like at Essie is that you can give birth and go on parental leave in the exact same year that you take reentry leave when your loved one comes home. And so that's really important to us. So one question that came up in developing the policy, and that I think always comes up with anything that relates to resources, is this sustainable? And so at Essie in 2020, we have 4 out of our 14 staff members taking parental leave. So we are seeing that it is possible for us. And yet, we also understand that it may not be at other organizations. And we just want to name that there are values that are made, in other ways that might limit that. For example, that's why this litmus test doesn't make sense, right? If you're an organization on this call and you do only grassroots fundraising, and therefore you don't take money that looks like over $10,000 or even over $1,000, this might be more difficult for you. And that is also a values-based decision that is in line with a politic, right? That we uplift and value at Essie, and it's just visited in a different area of your operations. So I'm gonna pause there and see if Gina or Shantae, if you wanna ask any questions or speak to this at all.
Yeah, I actually have a question, Lily, that I would like you to address, which is, I think that you made the point about this Black maternal health crisis in this country. I think this is something that, is very real for so many of us. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, the fact that the Black maternal health crisis exists, but Black health outcomes generally are disproportionate and a problem, right? And so can you talk a little bit about the choices that we've made in our parental leave as it compares to the choices we've made in our medical leave policy?
Mm-hmm. I can, and that's a hard one. And I think Gina will list this because we've talked about this at Essie. Our medical leave policy at Essie is significantly different than our parental leave policy. So our medical leave policy is that if you are certified by a physician as unable to go to work and go on medical leave that is unrelated to giving birth, right, a totally different medical condition, you are eligible, like with parental leave, for 4 months of time off, up to 4 months of time off. But a really key difference is that the full compensation is only for 1 month, right? So you have your health and healing time and parental leave looks like 4 months off of full compensation as medically certified, but medically certified for a different condition, and it's 1 month off. And this is really hard for us at Essie, and we've talked about it on numerous occasions. And this was a decision we made. I also want to stand in that, right? This wasn't something that just happened to us. This was a tension and a decision. And so I think what I want to say about this policy is that embedded in this process that we face with this policy is a call to action for those of us on this call, right, who are in the positions of doing this policy work. Because at the time that we wrote this medical leave policy, one of the key parts of our process was we read 30 employee manuals. That's how we came up with this. And we really sought after policies that were meeting high standards. And at the time that we wrote this medical leave policy, and to my current knowledge, this is the most generous compensated time off that we saw in our research for medical leave. I think the closest that we saw for full compensation for medical leave unrelated to pregnancy was 2 weeks off of full compensation. And then somebody would go in California on SDI, right, state benefits thereafter, which is about 60 to 70%. And so, first of all, if there's anyone on this call who has a medical leave policy that provides more compensated time off than 1 month, we at Essie would be so grateful to know that and to see your policy, and can also, if comfortable, share that with this group. That is something that we would really love, and that would be amazing. But as an organization that, when we wrote this policy, right, 5 years old, now 6, with limited resources, we made the decision to push the envelope and be the outlier in other areas, but we couldn't do that in every area. So given the priorities of our staff team, that looked like making a reentry leave policy that was brand new. And that looked like, parental leave instead. But the impact of that decision that we are really clear about is that you get more time off at Essie for medical conditions related to pregnancy than you do if you are diagnosed with cancer or if you have a mental health crisis. That is what this really means. And so, for those of us on this call who are benchmarking ourselves against one another, right? Like that's what we're doing. That's what this webinar is in many ways about. Is this the right standard? That's a question that I have. Are we good with this? Or should we as a field come together and push for change? And so I'm here to agitate us in that direction and say, is this the right standard? And would love to have those conversations together. And, we believe that it's important to be honest and to have humility in these moments when you're making these kinds of decisions. But as leaders of organizations, when we make these trade-offs, you have to do it with eyes wide open, with honesty, but you also have to be willing to revisit and to be moved and to be changed. So I think that our medical leave policy is an area where that might happen in the future. And maybe we as a field can do that together. Great.
I just have one more, you talk about this idea of, because I think that when we opened up the conversation around feminist policies, immediately people's minds goes to parental leave, right? And like, that is, as you said, a litmus test for how feminist is your workplace. Well, let's turn to the page of your parental leave policy and see, right? Like people love to do that. And you said that this was problematic, Lily, and I'm interested in you sharing just a little bit more about why that is our viewpoint.
Yeah, because it's easy in some ways. And I think about that when I think about like tech companies, right, who offer large amounts of parental leave time off, which is really resources, right? That's money. That's what that is. And so what that can look like is like, oh, we have a really generous parental leave policy. We really support women. Never mind that we don't have any C-suite women. Never mind that we pay women less than men for the same work. Never mind that when we uplift women, they are white women, right? Like that is like, that's what that can mean. And so it's not a litmus test, right? It is something that's important that people can do. But if you're not doing it with a depth of politic, with a Black feminist politic, it is limited and very limited. Great. So unless there's other questions, Gina or Shantae, I think I can move on to our final policy, which is wage withholding orders. Yeah. Okay, great. So as I said, the last policy I'm going to talk about is wage withholding orders. And for those of you who know what this is, they're probably like, why is this Black feminist? And we're going to talk about this actually as an example of what do you do when you include a policy in your employee manual that is not values aligned. So for those of you who don't know, right, because this is a broad audience, what are wage withholding orders, or also known as garnishments? That's another way that people refer to them. So that's when you as an employer get a notice from the government, in California for us, this is the Franchise Tax Board, that says that somebody on your team, a staff member, owes them some money. And you, as an employer, they say, are legally obligated to take some of the money that that staff member has earned away from them and send it to the government direct. And complying with these orders are legally required, as is having a policy about it. And so what's important about wage withholding orders, I think, as an example, right, of policies that aren't values aligned, is that there are many policies in our manuals that are there for compliance, right, for compliance. And it's important to situate our understanding of these policies within the legal system that is governing compliance, right? Which is the same legal system that perpetuates white supremacy, patriarchy, that harms people, that harms Black and brown people, that harms Black and brown women, right? That is what we're talking about. So that's the system that we are complying with in these policies. And so as people who are writing and enforcing policies, there are reasons, there are going to be several moments when for compliance reasons, you decide to do something that you don't support or believe in, that doesn't align with your values or your politic. And in those moments, it's important to first sit within our agency in these moments, right? It is a decision. It's a decision to comply, right? We heard Gina, a lawyer, tell us at the beginning, right? It's important to be considering that. And so if you're implementing a law in your organization, which is what you're doing by complying, that is not in alignment with your values, that's a choice. And so you have to be clear, are you gonna, decide and with eyes wide open to play by these white supremacist rules, or are we deciding not to? And that's a conversation you should have internally. That's important. At Essie, as a Black feminist organization, we made the decision after having those kinds of conversations and through having those conversations that to be purist about our politic in these moments with these policies would cause a lot of legal challenges and risk that would ultimately distract us from the work. And we looked into that on a case-by-case basis. And so we decided that we would approach with wage withholding orders to push the envelope as much as possible within the limits of the law. And that was the decision we made. So what I want to talk about now is that if you are in that position, and if that's a decision that you are making, or you are in the position of writing a policy within that decision that somebody else at your organization made, right? Like, how do you do that in a way that, how do you write a policy that is against your values in a way that still is aligned with what you're doing? So we're going to talk about this garnishment wage withholding policy as an example, and I'm actually going to go through it line by line. And so that's what we have here. So let's talk about the first sentence. A wage withholding order or garnishment is the legal order to an employer to withhold a sum of money from an employee's wages or salary, most often related to outstanding tax payments, educational loans, or child/spousal support. So we start by talking about what a garnishment is, because we are not writing these policies in general. And this is an important point for the people who run payroll. We are writing these policies for the people who deposit paychecks, for your team, for your people. And there is no expectation that everyone at the organization has an in-depth knowledge of what a wage withholding order is. But what is really important to make it clear and plain is that it's going to significantly impact their lives if this happens, right? So that's why it's really important to equip your team with that information. The second sentence, Essie is required by law to comply with federal, state, and local laws relating to wage garnishments. So this is the why of this policy, right? This is where you say that you're complying. We always recommend including a why in the policy, but it is especially important when you're writing a policy that doesn't align with your values after you've made a commitment, usually a public one, right? In a staff meeting, in a staff process, to have an employee manual that is values aligned. You want to name that and be really clear about it. Sentence 3 and sentence 4. Essie acknowledges that such legal orders are connected to a U.S. history of taking resources and land justified through discriminatory legal measures. No staff member should fear judgment or lack of empathy if she/they finds herself/themselves in such a situation while working at Essie. So what we're trying to make clear here with these two sentences is that this is not something we believe in, right? We're complying with a law that we don't believe in. And in fact, not only is it not something we believe in, but that in our advocacy work, this is what we're actively fighting against every day at Essie. This is a history and a lineage and a current reality visited in the lives of our team that we are fighting against on a daily basis. And so we need to acknowledge that not only is this practice not rooted in our values, but as we said in the sentence before, we're complicit in this practice by furthering it. And so what we don't want is that there is shame that will come from that, from an organization that is values aligned, that is in our politic, for being complicit in the system. We don't want that shame to be visited on a staff member, and that for that to be felt, in all of the places that are the hardest. So that's really what we're trying to speak to there. And then we end with logistics. So a staff member can understand what to expect, basically. A staff member will be notified if a wage garnishment order for their wages is received by the organization. Information related to wage garnishment orders will be kept confidential among those with financial management responsibilities for the organization. So that's really what it looks like to walk through a policy and to write and rewrite a policy that isn't in alignment with your values that you have decided to include in your employee manual as well. I think one thing that I just want to say is that we've talked about not copying and pasting, and these are the areas where, certainly for us, right, we were like, oh, we'll copy and paste these. These are standard policies. These are compliance policies. We're busy. These are the ones that we're just going to borrow from our colleagues and from our friends who shared manuals with us. But I think this policy helps to show like why we couldn't do that, right? That even standard or boring policies that are written for compliance are coming from a legal system that is absolutely worth interrogating in this way. So those are the 4 policies. Now I'm going to turn it over to Shantae to talk a little bit about this current moment.
Thank you, Gina. I'm sorry, Lily. I don't know what's going on with my brain today. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the changes we've made in response to COVID. As we all know, COVID hit us pretty hard in March. We had some plans for 2020 in terms of growing our staff. And also we had a record year, begun a record year of statewide work, organizing our staff and our sisterhood. And so we were also engaged in some isolation breaking community building. And all of a sudden, all of us were rethinking what we needed to do, particularly as a board, along with the leadership at Essie. And we had members, our members are Black women over the age of 50 with existing health conditions, right? And so there's some realities that they were dealing with regard to COVID that were incredibly heavy. And at the same time, we knew that COVID was going to hit jails and prisons hard and that our loved ones were going to be very, very vulnerable. And so what the board did was we sprung into action. And the first thing that we did was increase health insurance coverage. We revisited our coverage and we increased for spouses and domestic partners a coverage at 75% to ensure that the unemployment rate, which is high right now, and healthcare being so vital and also so scarce for so many people, that our staff and their family members had access to high quality coverage, you know, at a time when they were anxious and worried about that. We also looked at our wellness policy and we recognized that many of our staff had practices that they were normally engaged in that they couldn't access because of COVID and quarantine and lockdowns. And so we held on to the why of that policy, right? The goal being that we want to make possible a regular wellness practice for all of our staff. And so we made funds accessible from prior months to staff who were unable to use it. Also looked at the work from home dynamic of our policy. At Essie, working in the office is our default, and I can certainly relate to that as a public defender, the head of a public defender office, right? You have the work is in the office and people bond and work together. But with COVID, that changed. And so we continue to stand by this idea that's central to Essie, that work from the office is most important and vital. And it also, now that we are working from home, it shows why working in the office is better for our culture, for the developmental approach that we have, and for creative strategic work. So in this moment, we're seeing both the why behind that policy and also a need to adapt our policy there. Most of these policy adaptations are in our strategy and practice work as well. We had managers meetings to talk about what was coming up in our one-on-ones and our meetings with our staff and how to solve for those challenges. Making sure that our managers were doubling down on expectations, right? This isn't a time, and I can relate to this as a manager of managers, it isn't a time to be less clear about your expectations. You need to be more clear about what's expected of your staff and have those upfront conversations about the barriers that your staff is facing and how to meet those barriers and reduce them. So we looked at reducing workloads across the board for the staff, innovative ways to further connectivity, and just making sure that people could facilitate those connections when they needed to, but also allowing people to take time for themselves outside of work in the ways that they needed to during this time. It's just one tool, right? We have a lot of tools at our disposal, but this was just one of some of the ways that we have been responding to COVID by adjusting these policies. Some of the policies that we have actually been serving us really well during this time. For example, personal days, policy around personal days for political activity outside of the organization's work. We've seen people really take advantage of that. Also, our policy around sick time for mental health. Practice, but not policy, right? We also want to make sure that we are having that relationship of trust. Lily talked a lot about that, and I know for those who work in traditional nonprofit organization spaces led by white supremacist principles, a lot of what's coming up for me just listening. I'm on the board. Is that how do I do this? How do you do this? And people don't gobble up all the time. And so really it's a reorientation, as Gina started us off with those principles, those Black feminist institution building principles, to have trust and openness, that people are going to share what's going on with them, that wellness should be a priority, not only for your staff, but that you communicate that to your staff. We also allow folks to engage in hyper-local organizing by having this fund in our policy that allows our staff to partner with another member of our sisterhood for a hyper-local organizing event. There's still some limitations though. We haven't, like I said at the beginning, we haven't solved all the problems, all the issues that we're facing, and there's some places where we're still stumped. There are a number of barriers to productivity, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, and a lot of barriers to well-being, even with all of these policies. And so there is probably no more glaring example of this than supporting parents, right? And I saw some questions in the chat around this as well, is that parents, even with all of the benefits and the way that our policy is written, they're not gonna be able in some cases to take advantage of these policies and also feel safe about either taking their kids to school or daycare or having their child stay with someone else during this time. And so we've got to find, it's been sort of something we're still grappling with, how to manage that and have parents support those parents who are grappling with those questions right now, while keeping them, having them be able to access our leadership, professional development type of opportunities. So we haven't solved it, but we're staying flexible, offering flexibility and time off for our staff. Again, reducing workload, which I would also just put a pin in as well, because I think some of the questions I saw really speak to that. We have this idea of that the workload should be a certain way in the work, especially the work that we do, justice work, freedom work. But we got to rethink those and reduce our workloads and try to be consistent about how we're scheduling meetings so that parents can make arrangements for their household where possible. In addition, I want to just highlight that we also created caucus space for our staff during this time of COVID and the uprising for Black lives, caucus space for white staff members and non-Black staff members, and also caucus space for Black staff members. I'll kick it to Gina if she want to talk a little bit about some of those caucuses or turn to the next part of our agenda.
Yeah, I think we can go to tips. I think the caucus space point is just that we you know, in the wake of kind of the murders, the white supremacist and police killings of George Floyd, Tony Dade, Breonna Taylor, you know, what we ended up, Ahmaud Arbery, what we ended up doing was trying to make sure that the team that was Black and POC Latinx were able to have space with just each other, which felt like as a management a piece potentially risky in terms of, I think you can see the ways, and sometimes the orientation is that creates division. On our team, because of the culture that we have, I think everyone like really leaned into that and understood it. What also is important though is that white people were meeting separately with just white people. And that also that I think needs to be done with great care and transparency about what the white people are doing. And so just to be clear for us, like we sent to the entire team what it was that they would be meeting about, and it was you know, understanding the role that they have in white supremacy, discussing what are we doing to take responsibility for that, to resist it, to opt out of it, and to be in continuous practice of accountability and accomplishment. So we made that transparent to our Black and POC Latinx staff with really intentionally, because I think that when you do caucus space, you just need to really make sure that, like, if you're having white only space, that white only space needs to be done very, very, very responsibly and in line with a radical Black feminist politics. So I just wanted to say that before we go on to the tips and takeaways. And Shantae, I'll let you go ahead and do that.
Yeah, so the first tip that I would share with this group is that write policies for the people you want to employ, right? And so, we talked a lot about Essie and who we employ, but think about the folks who you want in your office. For me, this is Detroit, it's Black. I want as many Black public defenders, support staff, investigators, social workers as I can get on my staff, because that's the people that we serve. And I know that there is a difference when we have Black faces in those seats. And so I try to think about what are the barriers to Black folks becoming public defenders and staying in the work. And I think about myself. I think about all the aspirations that I have and the barriers and limitations that I had to grapple with in other places. And so I try to push for policies that are going to reflect that. I have an executive director and a board above me, so I don't always have the ability to sort of say, this is the policy that I want. And I know a lot of you on this webinar may be in that same situation, but you do have a perspective that you can give. You have some power and influence there to really push that the organization write the policies for those you want to recruit and attract. And as we're talking a lot about recruitment of Black folks and other people of color into our organizations, that's where you say, if you want those people to be working here, then we need policies that are going to support them. Also want to say, in terms of a tip, don't confuse making it possible for your staff to thrive at work with being able to meet all of the material needs that they have. As an employer, it's your responsibility to compensate your staff fairly for the work that they do and to provide benefits that allow them to live there. I always say to my staff, I want you to be able to do your best work. And so I want our benefits package to reflect that so you can do your best work. But there are and will always be things that an employer will see your staff struggling with something that is beyond your responsibility and ability to solve. And so just know that you shouldn't confuse those two things and try to solve for what you can. And as it relates to the advocacy work that your staff is doing, but not to blur those lines, because you also want to respect people's private lives. And then lastly, I would say where you think you can't, you can. Stretch yourself. You have to, we have to have a radical imagination and dream big in the work that we do. We have to believe that it's possible. And so you shouldn't let what has been done, what's been traditional, what's been the preference for your organization, prevent you from imagining a world, an organization, a space for your staff to do work where the issues that they've had to have had to grapple with don't exist. You have more power than you think if you are bold and courageous, particularly at this time when organizations are speaking out and making these public statements about Black lives. That this is the call to action, that you can go to your leaders and say, y'all put this statement on the website, you want to bring more people in, here's how we can be bold and courageous with regard to our policies. Also, on the flip side of that, remember you're human and that you can't do it all. You're not going to be able to transform your policies to what you may be seeing here that really resonates with you overnight. So focus in on one or two where you can push and really work through those before you move on to others. I'm going to kick it to Lily to give some tips and takeaways as well.
Thank you, Shantae. Great. So the first one I want to offer, I said, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's really important, which is include a why in every policy. A why meaning the reason why you're doing it. Don't make an assumption that it's self-evident. This is very important when you're doing it when it's against your values, but when it's aligned with your values, it's also important to make that clear. And so this is, both just important for training for team. It's also going to really help you with managers, right? Who are like people who are doing this on the front lines in implementing these. So making it plain will only benefit your culture and is transparent. And, people spend a lot of time writing their policies, hopefully, right? Especially after conversations like this. So it's important to make that visible to your team. The second one I want to talk about is to, not confuse performance with policy. And what I mean by that, to give an example is that sometimes, there is a performance challenge happening with a staff member. It can show up in your policies, but it's not the policy that's the challenge. It's something else that's going on. So for example, at Essie, we have sick time, and you get all of your sick time upon hire, and then it renews January 1. So you get all your sick time at the beginning of your year, basically. And that's because you can't control when you get sick, right? And especially in the age of COVID, it's really important that we encourage people to take time off and be at home when they're sick, right? This was true when we were working in office, and if we come back to office, that's what it will be. And so you shouldn't earn the right to get sick, in our opinion, and accrue that over time. You should just get the time that you have at the beginning of the year. So what that can look like, right, and like fears that I think can come up is like, well, what if we have a brand new staff member who takes sick time right away? And the answer is like, well, if they have the flu, then they should do that. They should absolutely take that time right away. That's what sick time is for. If they don't have the flu and they're taking it for not actual sick time, right, for another reason, that's a performance problem. That's a culture issue if there's also a trust thing happening there that you need to address differently. That's not an indication that you should change your policy and not make sick time accessible to people who get sick. So that's something I would really recommend you consider when you are thinking about changing a policy. Is this about performance, or is this about policy? The last thing I'll say is, we talked a lot about our team. At Essie, we do things in a Black feminist fashion as a collective, right? And so this is definitely true of developing policies. Include your team in the development of your policies. Don't be afraid that that's how they get better, right? This is how the work gets done well. And then after you've developed your policies, whether it's a big revision or a writing from scratch, and you should also name that you're going to invite feedback from your team throughout the year as things come up and people live in those policies. But what I recommend is actually making it clear when you're going to assess that feedback. And the reason why is that it's important to give your policies some time to breathe and have room, right? That speaking to sick time again, right? If one person runs out of sick time out of a staff of 14 people, that might mean that you don't have enough sick time and that you should reconsider whether you should offer more sick time. That also might mean that someone had a really hard year with the flu or with a health issue, and that is what that is, and that in general, actually, you do have enough time. And so it's important to be responsive and to feedback, but to also really to do that in a thoughtful way at a specific time in a process that's intentional. Great, I'm gonna pass it to Gina for tips and takeaways as well.
Great. I'm looking at time, and I'm actually going to go take us into acknowledgements, and then want to leave open some time for questions and answering some of the questions that people are raising. So actually, we have a call to action. What will we be as organizers without a call to action, y'all? I do not know. So let's do that first, and then we'll do it. Go ahead.
So here's what we want you to do, right? Bring reentry leave to your organization. I think that the point has been made and stressed, and I think a lot of you resonate with that. Figure out ways to bring that to your organization. So important because of the amount of people who have loved ones incarcerated, particularly women. Contribute to and open source your crisis policies. I've been seeing in the chat, there's somebody who's got a survey that folks want. If there are other things that you have been doing with regard to COVID, let us know. Send us that survey. We will send it out to, we'll collect those and we'll share out those results to everyone on this webinar so we all can learn from each other during this critical time. And then respond to our survey that asks about Black feminist crisis policies and let us know what's going on with you. Take it to Gina.
Great. Okay, so just want to wrap this up quickly so we can move on to questions as our final component. We stand on so much in terms of time, process, but also
we have a lot of people who were a part of this and getting us here, getting us to the culture that we want to have and be in at Essie in terms of our workplace, as well as having the policies that we want and reflect our radical Black feminist politics and values. So, you know, first and foremost, organizationally, there were many organizations, over 30 in our field, whose employee manuals we poured ourselves over, studied, Lily in particular, was bedtime reading for, and we just want to be, you know, acknowledge that this is, that there are foremothers of this work that that are unseen and that we are so grateful for and to. We also have a phenomenal board of directors. Shantae is a perfect example of that, including Teresa Younger, who is just one of the most exceptional institution building minds. She is the CEO of the Ms. Foundation for Women on our board. Hillary Brooks, another phenomenal institution builder and thinker around policies and politic. She's Associate Director of Powered California and is also on our board. Karen Shane, who is the most incredible and low-key accomplice of Black liberatory freedom that I have ever met, and I'm proud to call her my board chair. And we have as well benefited from just the incredible thought contribution of Jared Lederman. Man, he's not on our board anymore, but like, boy, was that a beautiful and important partnership to help get us here. Makis Ansulatos and Tinjinder Singh. We also have, you know, to thank Hope Wood and the consulting brilliance that is Hope Wood. She has been really a partner and a steward for us to bring us into a place where we can really hold our team the way that we want to. And our origins in many ways also began with the Women's Foundation of California. We were incubabies of theirs as fiscal sponsees in the early days. We've since spun off, but Kathy Schreiber and Serena Khan certainly have made it an undeniable and a significantly positive impact on the formation of our organization. Want to also shout out Impact Justice and Alex Butansky, who is a go-to of mine. And then our team, our staff, is been the primary thinker and holder of this work in ways that have looked vulnerable, have looked available, and have looked studious. It has been a collective effort of our staff. We work as a loving and powerful unit, and so want to just shout out all the members of our staff team in helping us to create our policies. And with that, we're not done. We're not perfect. They're not, it's a living, breathing document. We need help in a lot of places. And part of the purpose of creating this community or this webinar was a hope that we could create community because we believe that that enriches all of our work. And so we look forward to being in more contact with each of you. And I just so appreciate everyone who was able to join us for this time together. And with that, we are going to go into some Q&A. We have 15 minutes left in this webinar and looking forward to seeing what questions we might be able to discuss and answer.
Okay. So I'm just looking at the questions. There was a question about, are there regulations, and this was a theme, that about how much leave an organization can give or how to really structure the leave that we give to parents versus those who are non-parents, and how do we balance those with regard to the sort of legal frameworks within which we work?
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry, tell me one more time.
Yes, no problem. Are there any laws or regulations on how much leave we could give as an organization to our employees? And I think a connected question that I've seen is, are there any sort of prohibitions or discrimination we're running into from between giving our parents and potential parents more leave than say someone who's not a parent?
Ooh, such a good question. And these are things we've thought about and discussed to a certain extent, but I'm going to turn to Lily, if that's okay to take the answer on this.
Yeah, so in terms of, are there laws that govern leave, I'm not going to speak deeply to that because there are many people on this webinar with lots of decades of HR experience that can answer that, but also can know that, of course, for parental leave, yes, like there are lots of laws both at the federal level and at the state level that govern that and that are changing, and it's very important to keep up with that. I think speaking to the question around like, we offer more parental leave to people who become parents than people, or more leave because of parental leave to people who become parents, to people who don't. Like, is that something that could be considered discriminatory? And this is something that we discussed and that our board really grappled with. And where we came down on it in this moment is that this is something that is sort of a standard because there are so many laws that do actually support, require, and provide this leave that very much exists. And so that is something that, that we're sort of following the suit of, and got advice from HR providers who shared with us that this is really something to be mindful of, that if we give it to all staff members who become parents, right, then that's not discriminatory. But this is open to opinions and interpretations. Where we landed in ours was that no, that it's not discriminatory, but that we can always do better by providing more kinds of leave for more kinds of circumstances, which is really where that medical leave call to action comes from.
Thanks, Lily. Another question, this is directed at Gina, but feel free anyone to answer. Gina spoke about workload expectations being adjusted. How does Essie as an organization handle reduced output and funder expectations? This person is really struggling with the culture of overwork.
This is such a good question. So I think that this is really, and I said some of this a little bit in the chat, but I think that we have to be rigorous and thoughtful planners and managers of work, and work smarter, not harder, and also be transparent with our stakeholders about what it is that we plan to achieve. And so I think that for us, what that looks like is having updated conversation with funders if we feel like for whatever reason circumstances in the world or even internally have changed such that we will not be able to deliver on a particular set of outcomes. It also looks like planning in a way that anticipates the kind of team that will need to pull it off. If we want to hire people who are Black women, who are queer, who are trans, who are Latinx, who are of multiple any kind of identity that is historically and currently oppressed, then we need to know that they carry a variety of other kinds of tolls that could at various times for various reasons interfere with work. And at the same time, we believe that that is exactly who we need for the reasons that I discussed at the beginning of this webinar, at the center and at the leadership positions of this work as well. And so what that means is good planning. And what I want to make sure that we don't fall into as a movement, because let's be clear, we are in a moment of Black uprising where we have political opportunities that we must seize in order to advance our goals of liberation. This is actually not the time to take a very long nap. And so I think that for our team, negotiating that well has meant being in kind of strategy conversations together about what we can do, what the political opportunities are for us to advance our work, while at the same time what the realities are internally for our abilities and our capacities to take those things on. And so it's about planning in relationship with the context of the team that you have, as well as the context of what it is that you need to accomplish and what your mission in this world and in this work and time is to do.
Thank you, Gina. This one's related to the reentry leave policy question around, can people designate more than one loved one? Do they have to do it at the beginning? And then why the delay of 12 months for people to be able to take that reentry leave? And how do you explain that?
Lily, you should take this.
Great. Designated loved ones, talking about that first. So no, we don't ask people to designate, even though we call them designated loved ones, we don't ask people to designate them to us. We trust our team, and that is part of the culture that we build, and we make that really clear. And so these are people in your life who may be blood family, but maybe are not, right? But you are still in a care relationship for and share care responsibilities with. And so that can look like a lot of people. And in communities, that's important for us to acknowledge that there's a significant amount of responsibility and care that's being provided to multiple people in a close family unit that is a non-traditional family. So no, it's something that we don't require someone designated up front. We trust our team. I think the other piece about this in terms of time off, just to clarify, and hopefully this will become more clear when you all get the manual, is that you can take reentry leave. You don't have to have been working at Essie for 1 year. It's available to people whose designated loved one have been incarcerated for 1 year or more. And that is because as an organization of women with incarcerated loved ones, this is a tension, right? We had to make a decision about how, especially in our jail system, right, folks can be in and out a lot because that is the challenges of unsupported reentry. And so we decided that for this initial policy and for this first time, that we could best make the commitment to offer this policy to everybody and to folks who need it by making it for people who really are coming home after a long time in jail or in prison. And immigration detention centers, right? And so that's really the tension and the decision that we made, and we'll learn from it and see if that's something that we need to shift in the future.
Thank you. What are you doing to further connectivity among the staff during this time?
A variety of things. I think, Willie, you can also answer this. But we've had team checkouts, where people share how they're doing at the end of the weeks. We have had like different kinds of stretch breaks and facilitated Zoom sessions where we're not doing work, but we're just like being with each other. We have, Lily, you can speak a lot better to this than I can. Why don't you tell us some more of the things?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And I also want to give a shout out to our team, my colleagues, Yesenia, who's on this webinar, and Winter, who have really been leading this work and designing it. But sort of in response to COVID, for the immediate sort of like shock of being home and disconnected from one another as an organization that really values in-office, in-person, interpersonal organizing time, right? We added daily theme activities that looked like meditation, that looked like stretching, that looked like things like that. We've since scaled that back, and we've done that intentionally and in conversation with our team because we're finding that there are other ways for us to be fostering connection. We do that. We have checkouts at the end of the week, as Gina said. We also have weekly staff meetings. We used to have staff meetings once a month that were longer and substantive, and we still have those, but we have decided to increase that and add more content. I think another piece is, thinking about the ways that we're connecting. And I think this is really important, that we are connecting as colleagues and that we're trying to break our isolation in that particular way. And so one tool that we've been using more that was, brought to us again through our colleague and partner Hope Wood is more coaching. And so we also offer sort of time and space for there to be peer coaching that happens at regular intervals throughout the month. And then the last thing I'll say is that Gina and our colleague Winter are leading our team in a deep study for Black August for political education on the topic of Black feminism. We're reading How We Get Free. And so again, that's a way that we can connect as colleagues and comrades in this work, not simply, as people, which I think is really where the deeper, meaningful connections that we found lie.
The other thing I just want to quickly say, thank you, Lily, is to say that we have a really strong culture of professional development and support to team in ways that look both collective and one-on-one. And so providing team members and like doing kind of matchmaking with strategic coaching, somatic coaching, and so forth is something that we also make available. And I want to just give a shout out, I neglected to say in acknowledgements, the Black Organizing Organizing for Leadership and Dignity is a deep heart and strategy sister organization of ours that we love and has been able to provide so much richness in understanding of how to really hold people on our team. And they also have been providing, you know, a variety of kinds of access to programming for our team to be able to do their most brilliant work. So wanted to shout out Bold.
Yes. I think we have a few more minutes. So I wanted to just ask for any final thoughts from our panelists about, for folks who are going back to have conversation with executive directors, leadership, boards, funders, who may not have any orientation to Black feminism and Black feminist institution building. Final thoughts for as people leave this space and conversation. Maybe I'll ask Lily and then I'll go and then we'll have Gina to have the final word.
Yeah, thank you, Shantae. Yeah, I'll be brief. I think, you know, for those of us on this call who are in positions to be in leadership, but also be advocating and being in partnership with leadership around designing these policies, one thing I'll offer is, you know, just like this work is valuable and it impacts the team's lives. And I think especially when you're behind the scenes, it's really important to just like root in that. It doesn't help your team at all to ever feel like this isn't valuable and you shouldn't be intentional and you should just sort of rush through it, copy and paste, right? This impacts your team's lives. So want to offer that and share that. And then I think the other thing is because this work is meaningful, because this work is valuable, because you're at so many intersections of so many tensions around resources, around multiple needs, around combating the impacts of oppression that your team faced in your team policies, be rigorous about it. Be really rigorous about it. You know, do the work. Don't just, these policies, we hope we offer them and that they are helpful, but read other policies, really think about what makes sense for you all, really interrogate how this will impact your culture, think about bringing empathy to that, and know that, again, when it feels like you're spending a lot of time, you will. This work is important. So I'm gonna check and pass back to Shantae to either speak or pass to Gina.
Yeah, I would say just think about the people you have on your team and what it would mean for them. I think about the Essie sister who's going to take reentry leave and what that's going to mean for her. And just how I saw some people brought to tears by what they're hearing. Think about that and have that propel you to be courageous and bold. Last words, Gina.
Just that this is a project of Black joy. So make it fill your spirit and your days with some light and community. Don't feel overwhelmed by it, please. And yeah, consider us, please, as partners. If you'd like to ask more questions, we'd love to be available to you. And we're hoping that you send us some of your wisdom because we know it's out there. And so thank you so much for everyone who made time for this. And we wish you a happy and a studied, rich Black August. Sisterhood is powerful, y'all, and we'll be in touch.